Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, will come a waltzing Matilda with me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis at the Crossroads, another interesting forum, and I'll bring up the subject matter in a minute. First of all, I'd like to welcome our forum members. Betty Lukes from Adelaide. Welcome, Betty.
Hello there, Arnie.
And Wallace Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Nice to be with you, Arnie and Betty.
Mm-hmm. No worries. All right. We came across an article, and I'm going to bring it up, and it's here by Kerry Bolton, and he's talking about Brooks Adams and the law of civilization and decay. And I think that it's very important because we talk about if you like, in Christian circles, we talk about the law of love. And I know that in discussions I've had with other people that this law of love permeates all philosophies. And it's up to the individual to understand where their philosophy is coming out on this and whether it is a law of love or it's a law of tyranny. And many things have been done historically in the name of different faiths, different religions. And it's been one of a tyrant. And that really can bring about, of course, civilizational conflict, and of course, if in what we're looking at today is we're looking at the actual collapse of civilization, and so these are very important points, and they need to be discussed. So, opening thoughts, Betty Lukes.
Thank you, Arnie. Well, it's a number of years ago, of course, that Eric Butler spoke to an audience in which I was there, where he mentioned that this civilization was decaying, and he likened it back to the time of Christ on earth. And he didn't see Australia as the center of that civilization. We're on the outskirts, and he likened us to the Middle East or Palestine at that time, in the time of Christ. And it was that we had every chance of regenerating a civilization, whereas the center of that civilization was, of course, in Europe. And he referred to an author who wrote the book, The Law of Civilization Decay, in 1896, and that was Brooks Adams. And I was pleased to find that the New Zealander, Kerry Bolton, has a review of the book linked up with Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. C.H. Douglas spoke well of Brooks Adams and said he was a realistic historian. And I think that's where we need to start.
Okay, thanks for that, Betty. I'm going to just give the floor to Wally and to see if Wally take this further. Wally.
Well, I do know that Douglas referred to Brooks Adams, and not only that, but Gorham Munson, who was more or less the social credit leader in the United States, in his book Aladdin's Lamp, The Wealth of the American People, certainly gave a very favorable account of Brooks Adams and the decline of civilization. I don't know exactly what else to say on that. I haven't read his book, actually, so I'm not sure. But of course, the Bolton article that you referred to refers to it. I think maybe I will just let you and Betty just add a little bit to that before I continue, okay?
I had myself muted. Thank you for that, Wally. Okay, so civilization and decay. This law of love that I touched on earlier, and in my immediate family, extended family, I'm exposed to a lot of different races and a lot of divergent cultures. And I find that we're able to find common ground at certain times, and of course on this basis of love. Mutual respect, courtesy. We're able to find common ground. We're able to work with each other, and we're able to engage and participate, negotiate, have divergent points of view. And these to me are important things. And when of course we're intolerant towards someone else's point of view, then of course that leads to personal, I call it rub, friction, conflict if you like. And of course if that moves to the area of community or even nation, then of course it can lead to much more violent actions, of course. So we've got to consider these things in our getting on with people. And how do we get on? And can we find common ground? And I think this is most important, because no one has a monopoly on doing the right thing. No particular philosophy is so permeated with goodness that it has a monopoly on doing good. Betty Legs.
Arnie, I was interested in Brooks Adams' material and Kerry Bolton's, and one reason was Jordan Peterson dealt with the pyramid of power, but I don't think he saw it in the way that C.H. Douglas saw it, because C.H. Douglas saw it, as has been said by, I've forgotten the other chap who said it, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what we are seeing now. But Brooks Adams acknowledged that there are many causes for the decay and death of civilizations. And Kerry Bolton makes the point that too many ignore the central role of materialism in the decline and fall. And the cultural decay was first noted in architecture, between city-states founded on commerce and trade and those that maintained their culture cities. Well, of course, we see that where the money power has taken over and the culture just disintegrates. And going through a civilization's stages of growth, maturity, and eventual decay, looked at where money and status dominates and energy is expended on material gain, and it's at the expense of the spirit upon which it was founded. And that really is the same as what we see today. And I liked what Kerry Bolton had to say. Bring us up to the present day. He wrote, the preeminent world city, of course, is New York, and it is a symbol of the leader of the Western world. And here we see not the beginning of a new and vigorous growth, but the outgrowth of the decayed elements of Western civilization. And I thought, how true that is. How true.
Thank you for that, Betty. That's most important. I'm going to just highlight a couple of websites here for our audience, and that the first one is Kerry Bolton's. Kerry Bolton, New Zealander. He's available. You'll catch him kerrybolton.com, and of course you know our library, where we have quite a significant number of books and writings, although I don't believe we've got any of Kerry Bolton here, although the Veritas books do carry some of his. And of course our YouTube channel, Arnis Lukes 13. You'll catch these videos and much more. And then finally you've got the Crossroads. I'm just bringing that up now, and the Crossroads is where we'll place all of these videos when they're completed onto the Crossroads for your viewing. Wally Klinck.
Well, of course, money is a means of making choices. It is a means of exercising power. And if the control of money becomes monopolized, it means that the ability to make choices and to enforce policy is monopolized also. Now, if you believe that mankind is given an independent personality and an ability to think and a right to think and a right to make choices, you will, of course, not cede to money that type of monopolistic power, because you want to make sure that the individual retains that type of choice. So that if the money system, and that it has, it's a very centralized sort of thing, the way it's organized today in terms of determining the destiny of nations. You can see that when you can send nations to war without consulting the people. This is obviously an exercise of centralized power of highest significance. because it affects people very, very, very seriously. So we have to, and it is recognized, I think, by certain prominent historians that the role of money has played a major role in the development and in the decay of civilizations. For instance, in the Roman times, it led to the latifundia, the large land holdings. There was inflation and so on, and also, of course, the empire became overextended and sort of fell apart from within. But so I just thought I'd make those few comments with regard to this situation.
Thank you for that, Wally. I'm just actually going to cut across to an image. I'll just bring it up here, and there we go. And that image illustrates this social dynamics of exerting power from the perimeter, if you like, the circumference, in towards the triangle, and the triangle being the administrative function of government. And that is that the triangle, the inner part, has to work under a system of authority and discipline. Ultimately, someone is responsible, and that's what the triangle is for. But the circle being community, exerting power on the triangle. And these illustrations, these symbols, are actually very important for us to begin to understand what the correct relationship between the individual and society is to work through. Betty Lukes.
Yes, Arnie, it comes to understanding the importance of the principles of human association. And I think of what Douglas had to say in the approach to reality when he says, as I conceive it, social credit covers and comprehends a great deal more than the money problem, important as that is, primarily important because it is a question of priority. Social credit fundamentally involves a conception of the relationships between individuals and their association in countries and nations, between individuals and their association in groups. And that's where we've got to begin to understand. That to me is why when Jesus says, love one another, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that's where it begins. And I think of when it comes to the relationship between husband and wife, I am quite certain that Jeffrey Dobbs was right when he said that the relationship of husband and wife affects, or it is them alone that must consider how their relationship is going to work, what will work for them and what won't, and no one else should interfere. And I take that as a very important principle. Being a mother-in-law, I do my best to allow them to work out their own relationship as husband and wife amongst my children.
Thank you for that, Betty. I'm just going to cut across to another illustration that's on their website, and that is this one here of world government. And this illustration is essentially the outworking of the pyramid of power. And if you notice down the bottom, you'll see the will of the economic plenty, or the policy of the individual in blue, working through private individuals and workers and electorates. And at this point here, Cabinet of the Nations and peace treaties, and this entire power structure that's above the individual. And of course, this illustration highlights that at the apex of the pyramid are the financial institutions, the banks. That's what it's about. So that's another service that we've got in our library for you. Wally Klinck.
Well, the thing of it is, we as social creditors talk about immanent sovereignty, which means the independence of the individual to be able to be self-determining. But we operate not as individuals only, but in association with other individuals. In other words, we associate in order to obtain certain results that we want to obtain and which we cannot obtain working as individuals. So it's very important that we understand the principles of association if we're going to come out with the best results. And, government has a function. But if the function becomes excessive, or if its power becomes excessive, it interferes with the immanent freedom of the individual in a way that is not justified and which is actually damaging to the ability to obtain results which are satisfying to the individuals who comprise the group. The word balance is extremely important in social credit. We talk about the balance of nature. We talk about homeostasis, or the principle of sufficiency in engineering. Balance is very important because when things get out of balance, they become unstable. And so the idea that is expressed in the diagram that you showed, the book, the circle with the arrows pointing inward, is relating to policy. Individuals in society should be directing their communications to those who are able to do things for them, who will be performing things to get results. And that is the way it should work. These people should get directions from the outside, take the directions, and perform in a satisfactory manner. If they don't perform in a satisfactory manner, the individuals comprising the group should have the ability to let them know or even depose them if necessary. And that is the proper relationship of policy and power. When you get power that is concentrated and is established so it can't be removed, then you get tremendous dissatisfaction, conflict in society, and ultimately you get revolution, which none of these things contribute to the real quality of life. You want harmony, you want cooperation. Somebody mentioned love. That is probably the essential element or ingredient in the whole mix. Because if you have love, if you have a spirit of love, you will make the greatest effort to accommodate your fellow man in a congenial and constructive manner. Those are just a few things.
Thank you, Wally. That's I find that quite profound. That that's not love is not something that you're going to legislate. It's something that is freely given, and you do it. Mutual love and understanding, cooperation. I mean, these to me are important parts of how society, how individuals get on. And if it's to the point of legalism, where someone has to arbitrate and determine what is right and what's wrong on something, that to me is where love has failed. And so that's how I see it. Betty Lux.
That reminded me of a paper by Owen Barfield, and it was dealing with the difference between equality and equity. And you go back in English history, and you find that the king, who of course he sent his judges around on the circuit to determine the quarrels that there were amongst the people, and what it was realized that the law wasn't always fair, and so the king set up another system, and it was called the equity courts, and it was that that the particular two people, their grievances would be discussed, but the judge who was there on behalf of the king would say to the one that was the wrongdoer, I can't prosecute you, but I can determine that if you do this, then you'll be in trouble, because it was an area that the law did not cover, and that's how the courts of equity were first formed. And you hear a lot of discussion about equality these days, but as Jeffrey Dobbs says, the key word is equity. We're to look for equity in this.
Thank you, Betty. I'm going to cut across to a screen I've just happened to grab from Owen Barfield's website. Obviously, the people have built up a repository, and it's got the document, Equity Between Man and Man, and of course he starts by establishing that he's a student of Rudolf Steiner, which I think is an interesting point that we can discuss at another time, but it's certainly open there for consideration. Wally Klinck.
Well, you see, I think we're talking about something that touches upon the difference between, shall we say, the Old Testament and the New. The Old Testament seemed to be based on law. Now, law is a static thing. It is not a dynamic thing, and it is determined by human reason. Now, human reason is certainly valuable, but it can't give an answer to all things. I think that the Christian idea is that there is in us what is called the Holy Spirit. In other words, it's an impulse. It's not a reason thing. It is a thing that is simply innate or intrinsic to the nature of things, and it is that which makes things as they should be. Whereas law can be very oppressive. In the first place, it is something that just proliferates and proliferates because you can never come to a complete and total answer to various things in life, things which which love can actually resolve. So I think that the law applied to I should say, primitive people who needed law, who were sometimes quite unruly, and they had what seemed to be a rather jealous and vengeful God, who was alternately blessing and condemning people right, left, and center. But in no case was what we as Christians believe was the Holy Spirit active. At least it was something that it was to be found in the New Testament and in the Christian message. It was not part of the Old Testament or the Old Law. Christ said that he did not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. In other words, it's done. It's finished with the Holy Spirit. The formal law is done in the sense that if you have the Holy Spirit, you're not going to kill each other. You're not going to try to run off with each other's wives. You're going to do what is inspired by love. And it makes things a lot simpler, a lot more harmonious, and is likely to lead, in our opinion, to much, much better results for human beings.
Thank you, Wally. That's beautiful. The law of love, empowered or enlivened or quickened, all of those words by the Holy Spirit. What a beautiful image of reality. Betty.
Well then, just going along a little bit further there, I want to point out that whether I'm thinking now of politics and whether it's Labour or Liberal, they both have the policy of full employment, so they're going to have us work until we drop. But I ask, where is the time for contemplation? Where is the time for us to consider these matters at a deeper level? And that's where we are sadly lacking in the world today, where once we would have expected a direction from the church, it's just not forthcoming. And so I think we have to look at this. Another thing too that Eric Butler points out is long before they had devised their first money systems, men were obtaining benefits, real dividends from, he calls them, from profits. And for example, he pointed that when man plants a seed, he plants it in fertile soil, and the rain moistens the ground while the sun warmed it. And these are benefits that have nothing to do with party politics in a sense, because with him doing that, he found that as he went on and understood more about the law of association in agriculture, then he was he was able to produce more and allow time for that leisure time, that contemplation time that we're talking about. And Eric points out that primitive man discovered various truths concerning associations, and such as the lever, he would never have been able to free himself from the necessity of spending all his energy obtaining sufficient food. But even a basic weapon such as the bow and arrow was the making of proper associations which produced a true profit. The use of the bow and arrow enabled the individual to obtain his food in a shorter period of time. He was left with surplus energy, and that's a real profit, which he would then use as he saw fit. And that's a question that Douglas made when it was pointed out that in this modern age, you could travel from London to New York in a much shorter period of time than it once was. But he asked the question, what about the importance of what man did with that extra time? And that's really what we're seeking to understand more.
That's exactly right. Thank you for that, Betty. That's, you're painting a vivid picture in my mind of the amount of energy that a man would have needed to expend in order to plough a field and plant a crop, and then of course to maintain the crop and then harvest and then store it. And then we have the steam energy, we have internal combustion engines, we have electrical energy, and now of course we have nuclear energy, and these are all evolutions, they're multiplication factors of the amount of energy required. Now when a man was planting a crop, he was planting it for himself and his family, and so he was only looking at that. But nowadays with machinery, when we work a machine to work the land, if you own a good combine harvester, you just don't do your own land. You'll do your neighbours, you'll do those around. And so one man, what would take him with a horse and a plough, what might take him a day to do an acre or 2 acres or whatever it was. But now, of course, he's in the hundreds of acres, and he may be doing his own plus his neighbours around, and so the multiplication factor is in the thousands. And the fact is, we don't need to expend our personal energy in order to provide our basic needs. The machines are doing it. The question is, because we work in community, because we work in association, not everyone needs a machine, only certain machines. And so there's an increment, but there's also the association. And that to me is most vital. If we only look at our income and say, well, that's how much money I earn, and that's sufficient for my family, but the fact is, with the machines, you're actually imposing, we're becoming part of a greater community, and you can't deny that. You've got to look at it. And yet our financial system is two-dimensional. It's only dog eat dog, and that is so wrong. We're missing such a vital point, and that is the community in this association. Wally.
Well, you get a really tremendously vivid picture when you realize that in the 1850s, I think that it took about 75% of the productive capacity of the American people to produce their food supply. Today, I think it's less than 3%. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but that's close. And so, I mean, that is stunning, absolutely stunning. But what it has done, it's given an enormous profit in terms of free time to develop other things which further contribute to the quality of your life. And that has happened through what we call the unearned increment of association. In other words, it's like a mechanical advantage that we have through our learning and our experimentation that we have developed, discovered, and so on over time, which has simply made our ability to provide enormously greater. And so the problem is, though, that, in the early primitive peoples, they may have been a people who either hunted, or if they did engage in some, community effort, and they had a crop at the end of the year or the end of the season, they would probably share it. and that would not be a difficult thing to do. But in our modern age, we have a very complex economy. We absolutely have to have some kind of a way of allocating resources in a rational way. So we have to have a way of measuring a unit of measurement to make it possible to allocate resources. And in doing that, though, we have developed, money has actually evolved into a system of accountancy. It's just accountancy. We transfer figures from one account to another. And in doing that, of course, we have had to design the system. It's a man-made system. Now, being a man-made system and men being subject to error, we can't be assured that the system we have developed, the monetary system, which is a system of accountancy, that's correct. If it provides, does it provide adequately for production? If it does adequately provide for production, does it adequately provide for distribution? We can't just assume that it does, although most people do. And economics has actually taught in the past that the act of production automatically liberated sufficient purchasing power for the product to be bought. Well, Douglas's analysis proved beyond doubt that that is not true, and it's increasingly less true as you substitute non-human, non-labor factors as factors of production. In production, you pay out wages, salaries, and dividends, and bonuses, and so on. That is genuine income in the hands of people. But you have to add all sorts of costs from previous costing cycles for materials brought in to that, so that your prices are far, far greater than the incomes you distribute. Now, people will say, well, they don't usually think about it even. They just assume that everything is going to work. It can't work without the intervention of something else, and that is additional purchasing power to make up for the deficiency. Well, we do that by incurring debt in the way of loans from the banks when they create credit. So that does allow you to, on an irregular and unstable basis, to acquire the goods that you would not otherwise have been able to acquire because of a lack of buying power. But it doesn't really liquidate the costs of that production because it merely transfers them as a charge against the future, an inflationary charge. And that sabotages the real physical efficiency that we actually have achieved by monetary inflation. What it means, in just simply, is that we cannot benefit from what we have done. We cannot consume what we have produced until we do something else in order to gain incomes to allow us to claim things produced in the past. Now, this, on the surface of it, would seem to be quite insane. If you're going to do something and you achieve it, you accomplish the physical act, surely you would expect to be able to benefit from the results of that action now, right now, as soon as it's finished. Not at some future, not now, at the expense of doing something over the future. It has to do with our ideas of ownership and the system of accountancy that we've built up. And the basic problem is that the system of accountancy that we have devised does not properly fulfill the function of distribution.
Thank you, Wally. That's very well put and very vividly put. That our debt clock demonstrates that. It never goes backwards. It always increases in debt. And of course, if we weren't going further and further into debt, we wouldn't be able to participate in the production that has already been achieved. We have to work tomorrow. And in the case of the entire world, it has to work for the next 3 years, non-stop, continuing to produce at its current rate in order to repay this debt to central banksters. It's a fraud, and we're confused if we think that the system is in equilibrium. Betty.
I think I'd just like to finish by making the point that those native peoples who went and spent the day hunting and brought home what they had killed for the whole of the people to eat would find it very strange if somebody said to them, well, before you can eat that, you've got to go and run around the block 6 times before you can eat it. But that's really what they're saying to us in this day and age, that you're not going to consume the marvelous production that this modern world produces, because there's all this money debt.
Very well put, Betty. That's excellent closing comments. And last round, Wally.
Well, that's the, if you want the functional or the empirical or scientific explanation of it. There is, of course, the philosophical, the metaphysical, philosophical, religious, if you want, aspect to it too. Now, Christianity believes in salvation through grace. Grace is something that is a gift. And I think that this is very instructive, or should be very instructive to us in the way we conduct our modern economy. We do not operate on the basis of gifts. We operate as though our salvation was due to works. Now, if machines are producing an incredibly larger part of our production than humans, which they are, and increasingly so, then how can you possibly operate on the basis of salvation through works? Unless you pay the machines, but the machines are not going to consume the product. So the product is made for the people, and the people should be getting the possession and use of the goods in full at the end of each production cycle. So you see, there is a philosophical aspect to this. Either salvation, economic salvation, an application of the doctrine of salvation through grace, would be an automatic distribution of the goods which cannot be bought with the earnings of the people, which are inadequate. So there has to be an addition to their purchasing power. And today, as I say, we do it, we try to do it, but only by doing it in a way that places an obligation to do further work in the future, which does not really solve the problem. Unless you believe that the whole purpose of human life is just work, and more work, which is not a very cultured or sane attitude toward human existence. In the first place, we would much more rapidly burn up our resources unnecessarily, and I mean our natural resources, I mean our human resources. We put ourselves under great stress and strain, which causes illness and mental illness and physical illness. It just doesn't make sense. We should be able to benefit from the results which we achieve physically when they are available, not when some artificial financial convention comes along and tells us that we can't.
Thank you, Wally. That's an excellent summary of the day. And I'd like to just highlight to our viewers our Crossroads website. We'll be placing this video up on there, and also the our YouTube channel, the Douglas Social Credit, the Policy of Freedom. This is Arnie Lukes at the Crossroads, signing out for the day. Thanks very much for joining us. Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy bawled, "Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me?"